Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I've always wanted to come to Thailand, to Bangkok, to just eat as much as humanly possible, and I've kind of started doing that, and it's been really wonderful. I started with Ruby back in 2008, so it's been over a decade that I've been writing Rails apps and doing Ruby, and I came there from this world, which wasn't great. The flash banner ads when you're building something that you know that everyone loves on the internet, it gives you a really warm feeling inside. So that's kind of part of, I guess, where I started with ActionScript 3, which is very similar to Java, JRuby, word up. And I got to a point where I started kind of, my life shouldn't be this painful. Why do I hate working? What is going on? I looked for other technologies, and what I found were these two. And it was very hard to decide. There's always that point where you're like, which of the two things that look good should I pick? So I asked a woman named Amy Hoy, who does a lot of kind of marketing stuff and had her own SaaS for time tracking at the time. I think it was called Freckle at the time. I was like, what should I pick? And she said Ruby. It's easy, just go with Ruby. And I like to kind of give important decisions in my life to other people, so I just was like, okay, I'll pick Ruby. And I went with it. And it was really the first programming language, the first stack that I'd used that actually like made me feel good. I enjoyed doing side projects. I liked working. Even some of the boring stuff was really fun. And yeah, I didn't think it was possible, but it was. And I felt that feeling for, I don't know, 11 years, something like that. And I've used a lot of tools in between. I did Swift for a year and Go partially, Python for a year not that long ago, some other stacks, and all of it really just felt like tools to me, which is good. It's good to, I think, not to get super emotionally attached to your tools, but Elixir and Phoenix are the first kind of stack that I've used that have given me, again, that feeling of kind of, I guess, joy from my work day to day and side projects I'm creating. So I've been looking at problems in a new way. Ooh, that was loud. Looking at problems in a new way, it kind of, the way that, like it being functional and the way that everything is put together, it forces you with constraints into thinking about your problems differently. And I feel like the way that I think about them differently is in a very positive way. So for the last, I don't know, I've been doing Elixir development for probably off and on for like 6 years, but definitely in the last 2 years, any new projects that I create, I do a mix Phoenix new instead of a Rails new. So it's thank you for the joy for 11, 12, 10 years, I don't know how long, but I've put enough time that I'm comfortable enough that I've moved on to a different stack. And why would I move? Like, I don't want you to think this is going to be any kind of a Ruby bashing talk at all. Like, I really, really still appreciate Ruby. I still use it sometimes. I actually just wrote my first Elixir script the other day, so that was kind of one of the last hold-ons that I had from Ruby, where if I needed to do something fast in the shell, I would use Ruby. So I'm almost completely gone from it, but I love the community. I love everything that is brought to me for the last years. All I have to say is, hey, there's other stuff out there that you might want to take a look at sometimes to maybe solve different kinds of problems that you're having. So here are 10 reasons why I generally choose Phoenix before I would choose any other stack at this point. So reason one is that everything is parallel. There are, I guess there's Moore's law that, and computers aren't going to really get faster anymore, their megahertz aren't going to increase, but we're going to get 10 billion cores in our computers, so everything needs to go parallel, and everything needs to kind of think in a parallel way, which is, of course, an exaggeration, but it's good to have technologies that think of parallelism first. So, for example, Golang has their channels, Elixir has their processes, and everything that you use in Elixir is in a process. Your shell runs, your REPL runs in a process, all of the things that get started, all of the different things in Phoenix are run in processes, and yeah, so when you're forced to start kind of in a parallel world, it helps kind of remove the difficulties of using something like threads or forking out to processes. Yeah, so you can create processes as millions of them if you want. They take up very little memory to start up, maybe around 1 kilobyte. They own kind of their own memory space, and errors are encapsulated in them. So if one crashes, it's just this process that crashes and it doesn't crash your whole system. That's unless, of course, you are using a supervision tree, which is also a nice feature that I won't be talking about today. But anytime later in the conference, if you want to come up to me and ask me any Elixir questions, go ahead. I'd love to have a conversation. Yeah, so you can start a simple process by using spawn. It returns an address to the process, and the address is essentially where you can send messages to it. So it works by these processes are all being started all around, and you get addresses to them. You can also name them after a module. So if you know something is going to be started once, you can name it after, you kind of give it a permanent name, and then you can send messages to it with its permanent name. Or you can just keep these PIDs and then send messages to them. And generally what you'll do in a process is have some kind of a loop that happens that's constantly pulling new messages off of this mailbox, is what it's called. So you can think of a PID as kind of being like a mail address. You send it a message, and then it goes into the mailbox, which is essentially just a list. It's a queue, and you can pull them off synchronously. Yeah, so I almost never in a real production application use spawn. There's a bunch of kind of higher level abstractions to deal with starting processes. Either you start them in your application in the supervisor tree where one process can look after children processes, and if something breaks, then it knows whether to restart them or to scream to its supervisor. Or you can use something called a task, which is also kind of a higher level abstraction on processes that gives you some nice things that you can work with there. Yeah, so the things that why I'm talking about processes in the context of Phoenix is because one thing that I've had issues with Rails, for example, is kind of starting long-running processes or doing polling jobs. I end up doing a lot of polling jobs that are getting started and pulling some sort of a service a certain amount of times per minute, or PubSub works really well in the Elixir world. So long-running processes, if you want to fire and forget some sort of a message somewhere, you can do that to a process, and it can be handled kind of out of your normal synchronous application workflow. So if you're sending off analytics and it's not incredibly important that all of them make it all the way, you can just fire them off to fire and forget to a process. Yeah, sending email, just the basic, those types of things. They're great for that. And you end up kind of with this like ecosystem of these different processes that are communicating with each other. One's running over here, another one's running over there, and kind of just the way that architecture works, at least in my brain, makes much more sense for kind of how an application's architecture should work. It almost feels like lots of little microservices, but simpler, that are all kind of communicating with each other in hopefully the simplest way that you can come up with. So reason two is it's really fast. Just out of the box, it's incredibly fast. It's quick. It's not maybe Go speed, but it's really good. Lots of my requests are coming in nanoseconds instead of milliseconds, and that's without any optimization. Running on like a Heroku dyno a lot of the time, so not even like a hefty box. And you really can feel it with the way that the user interface is jumpy and just it feels, your pages load incredibly fast. Like it feels like a static app sometimes without doing anything caching or anything extra. So I was working on a what was it, like a sports meditation app, and it was a React Native app, front-end app, and then on the back end was a Phoenix app, and it was just running on a Heroku dyno, and they were multiple times featured on the App Store, and there was not even a blip in any of our CPU usage, our memory usage, the throughput, like all of it just, like, I heard about this thing happening afterward, came in and was like, oh, there was really some kind of a huge traffic increase. So, like, you can deal with these giant influxes of traffic, of course, to a certain level, that I would be more afraid of with some other technologies. So, reason 3 is that the testing story is great. So there's kind of this like, out of the box you get mixed test, which looks in your test directory and will run any files named a certain way. There's tooling, you have describe blocks like in RSpec. Everything just works. It's, I think because it's functional, a lot of the times it's simpler to reason for me about kind of my testing workflow as well. And there is a kind of like a productivity or procrastination tip about if there's something that you're going to procrastinate about, the trick is to move it closer to you. So if you are learning the guitar or doing some sort of fitness or I don't know, you're wanting to write more regularly, it's good to move your guitar next to where you spend most of your time, or your writing utensils right next to you, so there's less of kind of this friction in getting started. And I feel like there's a lot of friction with testing, where it's just, I don't want to write tests because I have to set up the whole testing situation, I have to decide which library to use, I have to figure out how to write my tests, how do setups work. But there's essentially one way to do it, and it works really well, and you can write tests incredibly quickly. And also a lot of the Phoenix stuff, like if you want to test web requests, that stuff comes out of the box too. And instead of -1, I just created PIFFest staff, which is Phoenix is fast and so tests are fast. And that's another reason why people might not be running tests. Boot up time takes forever. Running the whole test suite might take you a very long time. But I mean, you can only go so far with that. The application that I'm working on right now has like I think a 30 to 40 minute test runtime on CI, and it's a giant Phoenix app. So you get so far with it. And -1, I don't want to get rid of it. I love -1. It's a great thing. Love -1. Yeah. So what do we got here? If we want to create some tests, we have this is just a basic, so this is a doc test actually. So I'm going to use this pointer guy. If you create documentation, you can use it just like this. And if you have this examples with an IEX guy here, in your documentation, you can actually write tests. So this is saying use the command parse, do this, and then underneath it, it says what the return value should be. So it's actually not implemented right now. If you're in your test suite, your test file, you can say doc test, give it the name of the command, and then when you run your test suite, you actually run tests that are inside of your documentation. So what this does, I think a huge benefit of this, is that it's much harder to lie in your comments, which is a very common thing for me as well. So you're less likely to trick other people in the future. Coverage tools just come with it. You get this Mix is the tool. It's kind of like a combination between Rails and Rake and all of the things. It's pretty much the go-to tool for generating, running tests, all the things. Mix tests with a -- cover. It runs your tests and then gives you these results back, so you can see kind of what your coverage is in different modules. But it also gives you this HTML readout that you can load up and kind of look. It gives you sad faces too. It's cute. And it's telling me that there's nowhere that I'm testing the creation of this struct, which is true, but whatever. Yeah, so reason 4. Something that's been, I guess it's not even recent anymore. Phoenix Dashboard was added at some point to Phoenix. It's installed by default. And it gives you useful metrics, it gives you real-time graphs and kind of system information like RAM usage. For example, there's a thing called an atom in Elixir, which is very similar to a symbol, and you get information about how much memory you're using with your atoms, your atom stack, essentially. So like with symbols, if you use too many dynamically created ones, you can completely crash your VM with the RAM being all used up. So you can have some things into that. You can add other metrics and graphs to it if you want to, fairly easily. It's backed up by a library called telemetry that is written in Erlang, but also Erlang is completely interoperable with this colon before the name of things. And yeah, it's similar. The way that it looks and the way that you use it is similar to the instrumenter if you've ever used that in Rails. It looks like this on the main screen. You can see your versioning, kind of your memory setup, and you can see that you have these other metrics, request logger processes, all of these other things. And also you have, so this is the request logger. You can look directly at what your requests are. By default, this is available on dev, but you can push it onto production if you want to, using your authentication system, whatever you're using, or HTTP auth if you want to go that way. But yeah, you just get this for free, super easily extendable. Reason 5. So I've kind of had some issues. I had a conversation at an Elixir conference about I think that Phoenix should be more Railsy because I think it brings more people to the community. And Jose was saying that he thinks that it should be less Railsy because, I mean, he's right. Like, there's certain things that have been being built beside Rails that kind of make it, I think, easier to build a more flexible and easier to grow system, like where you separate your concerns into different areas instead of throwing everything into models or throwing everything into controllers. But the way that it's working with Phoenix is that you have this, so my app is called DWC here, and you also get this DWC web folder. Your web folder has your controllers, your live views, your channels, your templates, all of those things, everything that's kind of HTTP and request and response related. And then you can throw your domain things into your app's kind of flat namespace here. So this is where you would maybe interact with your databases. You would deal with pub sub things and kind of where the guts, the interesting things that you're doing with this come out of this area. Yeah, and it's kind of this whole Phoenix is not your application idea where there was the whole many years ago, the Rails is not your application. It's kind of, there's this, it's pushing toward Rails or Phoenix being this thin HTTP layer and then your actual application living somewhere else. Yeah, so reason 6, you get to keep your Rails-like generators. So yeah, you get HTML generators, JSON generators. Those will give you your HTML files, your kind of JSON templates. You get generators for model-like things, for migrations, channels, for live views. And you can create your own very easily using mix tasks. Yeah, so that's good. Reason 7, authentication is now shipped with Phoenix. There's a dependency called Phoenix GenAuth. Here's a quote that you probably just need to read the last part if you want to. Can you even see it? Yeah. So this is a quote from Jose that is talking about Phoenix GenAuth in the context of Devise. And he decided at some point that Devise was inflexible for a lot of application needs. It kind of did a lot of magic. And so he decided to go with more generating the files from the start instead of dealing with creating a library that kind of decided what you needed to do for you. I mean, this is a huge trade-off. Either using generators instead of a library, like upgrades are going to be an interesting situation when I ever have to do that. How do I upgrade my static files that I generated? Some of them are fairly complex also because it's authentication. But generally, you get authentication now just out of the box. And it's pretty nice. And you have all of those files available to look at too, so you can actually look through and see how all of this stuff is actually implemented. Reason number 8 is channels, or kind of the way that WebSockets are dealt with in Phoenix. I think that it's a really, really great abstraction. It's also very easy to set up. It's built on top of some of the core utilities of Elixir and also Erlang, which is a tool called, or a pattern called a gen server. But you don't have to even care about that at all when you're building it. So in the JavaScript, you just create a socket. You can throw your token in there if you want to, if you need to authenticate this user. And that gets then pushed up into the channel when you join. You can create a room channel, and then that room channel has a certain API where you need to implement a join function. And if you are sending any events through your WebSocket, then they're handled in these handle-in functions. And then what you'll see a lot in the Elixir world is this OK socket, this error reason unauthorized tuple, and this no reply socket tuple. There's just kind of like an interface of how you return values back to kind of store state in these processes that are running forever. In the beginning, it's one of those things when you're learning something new, you don't have to worry about these things, they just work. But as you move on, generally you go deeper and find out more kind of about how these patterns in the Elixir world are actually working under the covers. And there's also, for these channels, there's clients in lots of languages. I've used the Swift client before. I've used the JavaScript client in a React Native app that I built. It's very simple to use. So yeah, you can use Phoenix as your WebSocket API and push from your whatever application that you have. So LiveView is great. I haven't been following so closely there's a lot of similar solutions in the Rails world now. But LiveView, I think, kind of was one of the groundbreaking starters of these ideas, where you have a module essentially that you render HTML with, and then you can take requests from the client side without really using any JavaScript at all, and it just kind of, it works and updates the page in real time. It's also built on these gen servers, so you can look in your module, and if you understand what a gen server is and how it works, you can extend it kind of however you want to, because it's really just a really slight, tiny abstraction on top of the base thing that you already know. The JavaScript setup is like, really you just have to require a live socket. You do essentially the same thing as I did as I showed with the socket for the channels. And if you actually need to use JavaScript as well, there is something called hooks that you can use, which allow you to do kind of JavaScript interoperability if you want to play with charts and you're not using a live view chart, or maybe you have some legacy React stuff you need to bring in. You can set up hooks, so you can have both worlds if you need them. But I don't really need React anymore, like in most cases. Like, but I'm not building Figma or something crazy with huge user interfaces. It's normally a button is clicked and something happens, or something is updated in line and it works. So this is what the most basic live view looks like. And you get these are called sigils, and it's essentially like a string that then you can write it out nicer, but it gets pushed into a function. This actually will create kind of a data structure around this thing, and it will also check if the HTML is valid, which is great because you get errors right away if your HTML is crap. And what this is saying is that this temperature, whatever temperature exists in this assigns, will be updated whenever the assigns is updated, or anytime the socket gets updated. So what you would do if you wanted to update if you wanted to increase the temperature of your thermostat, you would create a button, and then you have these attributes Phoenix click, and you give it an event name, and then this event will be called inside of your live view. So inside of here, you would have this handle event. You can also give a value if you need to give some sort of ID or something, and then you give the socket, you update the socket, you increase the temperature, and then you assign the new temperature to the socket. And as you can see here, this temperature would then be updated, and then your HTML would be automatically updated over an invisible WebSocket in the background. So reason number 10, so the last reason, is Livebook. And this is something that it's been around for, I don't know, maybe even a couple of years, but I just started using it maybe 6 months ago, and it's fantastic. It's Jupyter-esque, so it's, if you've ever used Jupyter notebooks, it has kind of a similar concept to it. You have sections of Markdown where you can do headers, separate into separate sections. You have paragraphs. You have code highlighting if you want, but then you also have code cells. You can run the code cells. You can create graphs. There's a great API for forms, so if you have some sort of a value that you want to change, or you want to create a drop-down to choose different values, you can pick those. There's cells. I don't know if these are part of Livebook. I don't know if it's a plugin, but there are test cells that you can use that you can essentially just write tests directly in the cell. You can maybe write code above it and then write a cell with a test, and then you can run tests directly in your live view. There's a database connection that comes with it, so you can run queries directly in your Livebook, or you can create your own Livebook component fairly easily. There's like a JavaScript file that needs to be created and a module, and then you have your own. And there's some documentation that you can find out how to do that. And the reason why I'm talking about it in context with Phoenix is that you can connect your Livebook to a running Phoenix instance. So you can essentially use a Livebook as your REPL, but also test out things within your Rails application or within your Phoenix application. It's great. What we've been using it for mostly at the company that I work for is we are showing the company that I'm working for is an energy company in Germany, and we have a giant Elixir app, and we need to there's certain things that just in certain domains, when you're looking at like the map of how the whole energy system and where there's bottlenecks in the energy system, that how to display that data to show the project owners. There's also, wow, I have my things going. Listen to podcasts while I'm on stage. Another thing is when we have reviews, we can show the product team kind of cool things that we've done, like things that they normally couldn't see. We can show them in a Livebook, and it's very understandable. And it's very soon, I've started to see it, is the document. One of the things that I didn't say, but I really, really love about the whole Elixir environment is documentation. And pretty soon, documentation will be linking more to Livebooks that you can actually, you want to look at a Twitter library, but actually play with it a little bit. They'll have a link like open in a Livebook, and you can then directly start playing with it from the documentation. So it's essentially live documentation. It looks a bit like this. This is something that was just released today, I think, where you can use this the chat GL and similar things inside of a Livebook. So there's an image classification. Here is actually using the stable diffusion, and they're asking for a Ghibli-style numbat and forest. All of this is run directly inside of the Livebook, and you can see up here the forms that I was talking about. You can change these values very quickly if you're demoing something, or if you want to send it to someone else to try out new things with. Yeah, there's a site also that runs Livebooks on the web that you can just start one up if you want to. Yeah, and there's many, many more things that I would like to talk about, but I don't have time. So really, if you want to talk about Elixir, Phoenix, whatever, come talk to me. And I'm on Twitter, and I'm trying to stream more on Twitch, and I think that I might have some pairing partners. So, yeah, cool. Yeah. Another one too over there. He's less excited because he's on the phone. Thank you very much. And are there any questions from people? Are we doing questions? I don't know.
Questions?
No questions?
No.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron, for this overview of Phoenix and Elixir.